Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is LawBreakers? We did a little alpha preview of this, and I talked a little bit about it when I played a very early version at PAX, and, well, it's finally here. Question is, did it end up being any good? Is it a glorious return to form for Cliffy B's new company, Boss Key? Are there too many problems? And indeed, what will happen to this new IP in a world where there are a hell of a lot of shooters on PC, quite a few trying the whole hero shooter concept, and a few others trying arena shooter, which this particular game seems to stick 1 foot squarely into each camp. Tricky. Very, very tricky to know. One of the issues when doing consumer-oriented critique is that you don't want to steer people wrong. Why would you? That's a horrible feeling. If you recommend something that ends up being awful, that's a screw-up. If you recommend something that ends up losing its entire player base within a couple of weeks, that's a screw-up. So, it does worry me when a game like this comes out with a comparatively low player base to other PC games. That said, it's worth bearing a few things in mind. While it is a very, very valid part of your purchase decision to be aware of the active player count of a game at a time, and be aware of the possibility that, especially with a multiplayer-only title, that player base may fall to the point where matchmaking becomes untenable, it's also worth considering that if you look at this game as what I think it is, a hybrid between the Overwatch-oriented hero shooter and the more classic arena shooter style of doing things, then in reality, the player base isn't actually that bad, especially when you do things like compare it to things like Quake Live. You might be thinking, well, why on earth would you compare it to Quake Live? That's an old game. Yeah, it is. But the design principles behind LawBreakers call back very much to things like Unreal Tournament and to Quake, even though they have obviously also leaned into the current trend of archetype hero shooter based ideas. The notion that you've got a kit similar to Dota or League of Legends, expanding the ideas that games like Team Fortress 2 put on the table, and dealing with cooldown based abilities and very distinct identities of character. Compare anything to Overwatch, it's going to be a failure. Compare something to Quake Live, well, I don't know. Let's find out whether or not this is actually worth your time. First things first, we're going to dive into the options menu. It's a shooter. Based on the Unreal 4 engine, you would certainly hope that it performs well. And I'm happy to say that, in my experience, it certainly does. And it is loaded with worthwhile options. Head over to game options first. Most important thing of all time, of course, field of view slider goes up to 110. Not too shabby. The thing that's missing from this, fairly conspicuous by its absence, in fact, is the ability to scale the view models of the weapons. Some of them are a little oversized, in my opinion. Not all of them. I don't think it's quite as bad as Overwatch in that respect, but there are definitely some weapons that are a bit big for my tastes, and they don't scale properly with field of view and resolution. The ability to scale those down would be much appreciated. A lot of different volume sliders. This has built-in Discord voice chat, which is enabled by default. Just bear that in mind, so you might want to disable it. There are actually quite a lot of externally based features in this game, including NVIDIA highlights, which you may have noticed there earlier. It essentially uses shadowplay to capture highlights of really cool kills for you automatically. The game also has built-in streaming capability with Twitch, as you can see, and you can link your account to earn prizes and do streaming from directly within the game. Interesting features. The kind of thing that I think should be in most games. I don't really see a reason not to have them, even though they may very well be used by the minority. And the auto highlights feature in particular, I think, is pretty cool for players of the game, as opposed to, say, streamers and YouTubers who are in that tiny minority of people that a game would cater to. Your regular run-of-the-mill player absolutely would benefit from having highlights directly recorded. Of course they would. Overwatch has proven that's quite popular, and of course PlayStation 4 share feature is widely used by people who are not professionals. So it's good to have that. Video options are pretty solid, as I can tell. What I do like is the fact that the front-end window and in-match window can actually be set separately. So you can have the front end in a window and then your match in full screen, which is quite useful for people that don't want to sit around in dedicated full screen in a menu. It's good. You also have some screen scale percentage stuff right here, just in case your monitor size is kind of out of whack. Resolution support seems pretty solid across the board as far as I can tell. Ultra-wide is available, 4K is available, and performance is very, very solid. Is there anything in particular that's missing? There's nothing that's necessarily conspicuous by its absence. You even have multiple forms of AA, even if they only happen to be FXAA and TAA. It would be nice to see a bit more of that. But you've got to bear in mind, engines like Unreal at the moment do tend to bundle together features like anisotropic filtering into different presets and then not tell you what they are, which is unhelpful, and there's no hover over tooltip here to really tell you what these do. So digging after that is a bit of a pain. And as I mentioned earlier, you have the two kinds of AA, but then you've got AA under low, medium, high, and ultra, as opposed to AA under what you'd expect, which is 2 times, 4 times, 8 times, the standardized system. So it's a little bit unnecessarily confusing, and they could do with fleshing this out a bit. Key mapping is exactly what you'd expect, nothing really missing here. There's a button here. I want you to pay attention to this. If you're not really aware of what's going on with LawBreakers, pay attention to this in particular, because God knows the game doesn't, and it needs to. Blind fire. Key feature. Controls also available for a controller if for some reason you want to use that. This is available on console. At the moment, I believe the PlayStation 4 version is suffering hitching, although a recent dev update said they had identified the problem and they were working on it. Outside of that, you have in-game friends list, party creation. Unfortunately, the game does not support dedicated servers. The matchmaking currently is quite solid, but I have run into a few issues, such as the fact that it doesn't seem to have proper AFK protection, and teams can get frequently unbalanced quite easily. These are the kind of things that would be solved by having properly dedicated servers and proper tools to combat that sort of thing, which the game currently does not have. There are elements of this game that feel somewhat rushed. That's one of them, and I'm about to get onto one of the bigger problems that the game currently has, and I think something which really hurt it during the betas and is currently still hurting it in its retail release. That's the tutorial system, or the lack thereof. So there are various tutorials here that are essentially just static videos, which is not a good way of teaching people how to do things. There's a sandbox, which has a few interactive elements, but it's very poorly put together. For instance, I mean, hell, I'll just show you. I'll just dive into it right now. I mean, for one, you have to queue for the single-player training sandbox, which is a little silly. But if we jump into the sandbox, you'll be able to see exactly what the problem is with it as a teaching tool. So, okay, tells you about things like movement and all sorts of things like that. That's great. And then you approach these bots, which you can shoot, and they don't even disappear when you shoot them. So you take them down to 0 HP and they just kind of hang around. And you try and follow this really, frankly, quite poorly explained course that doesn't really teach you all that much other than the basics that you could have picked up from the key binding menu. And it never teaches you properly how to use key features of the game, such as 0G. It tells you how to move in 0G. This is the worst way to move in 0G, by the way. What it doesn't do is teach you properly this, which is one of the most important things in this game, and a unique feature that I've never seen in another multiplayer shooter. You have the ability to fire backwards. Not only is that a way to defend yourself, but it is also a way to propel yourself through the air using momentum. This is such an important feature, especially when combined with movement abilities. Like, the Wraith has a triple jump, a wall jump, and the ability to propel yourself through the air using that, which means you can do some incredibly cool movement, incredibly slick stuff. And yet, the blind fire, they're more focused on hitting something with it rather than using it as propulsion. What this game needs, as far as I'm concerned, bearing in mind blind fire is absolutely 100% key to smooth, proper, skillful movement in this game, which specifically considering the fact that a lot of the modes consist of capture and hold, which means that grabbing something and moving quickly across the map is absolutely key to winning. There should be an entire tutorial completely dedicated to a movement course using blind fire. For some of the roles, you do have these quick tutorials and that's great, but it's just going to show me a video of triple jump on YouTube. It's not going to let me practice it properly. That's useless. This should have been expanded in the beta, and the fact that it hasn't been means that the entire player base has suffered in terms of their ability to play the game, because they're not properly taught how. You can't expect people just to go to YouTube, even if you've embedded some videos into the game, and learn a game that way. People learn, usually, most effectively by doing. Think about Titanfall. Think about Titanfall 2. Think about the fact they not only had a tutorial, but also a full challenge mode for wall running. Because they knew how important it was. They knew how key a mechanic it was. It was integral to how that game played. And yet, this game doesn't have anything of the sort. And yet, the combination of movement-based abilities and blind fire momentum in 0G is absolutely key to enjoying this game and playing it properly. And in fact, you will not enjoy it if you're just floating around like a big fat idiot in the middle of 0G. Those are, the two big features that LawBreakers advertises. The world has been broken. Gravity has been shattered. So there are 0G areas on the map, which means full 3D 0G combat. And yet, in most cases, you see a lot of people, especially new players, just floating around like big fat idiot targets. And you know what? They're not enjoying it. I've seen post after post about this all over the place. Like, oh, the 0G combat's terrible. I just float around. I can't do anything. You can do things. You can do a lot of things. A lot of them are done with blind fire. Even these classes that do not have movement-based abilities, don't have a lot of focus on that, still have blind fire momentum, which allows them to catapult themselves across the map. I mean, say classes like Bombshell can do the classic rocket jump and combine that with the 0G blind fire momentum using the rocket launcher, which can get you a huge amount of propulsion, despite the fact that she's the largest and slowest class in the entire game. And then there are classes with these specific explicit movement-based abilities, like the fact that you can throw out a rope and swing on it, which is incredibly satisfying to do. And of course, I showed you the Wraith there. Combine slide with jump to give you extra momentum, and then double jump off a wall and triple jump, burning fuel in order to do that. Combine that with blind fire, and indeed with the alt fire knife lunge, and suddenly you are hopping across the map like a freaking ninja. You think about a game like Tribes, and the focus that that game has on that sort of movement, and you can see clearly what the problem is here. Anyway, I'm spending a lot of time in the menu here. Before I jump into some gameplay and show you exactly what I mean, hopefully by doing, hopefully not too bad, it's got loot boxes in it. They're all cosmetic, as you might imagine. There are quite a few skins available in the game, honestly, and a lot of them are pretty good, too. You not only can get armor skins, but also weapon skins right off the bat. I can have a look at it. There's some good stuff here. There's a good amount, and you can equip it on either the Law or the Breaker version, or both, of these characters. These are just cosmetic differences. The evil and good side, I guess, both have different versions of the same character. They just look a bit different and sound a bit different. The fact that they committed to that is kind of nice, actually. That wasn't necessary. Although, it does bring in some concerns about the ability to identify classes by silhouette, although I will tackle that issue a little later because I don't think it's anywhere near as important as some people have made it out to be. Got a decal for kicking people. Yep, you kill someone with a kick, it puts that decal on the screen, so it's a nice little taunt as well. There we go. That's kind of nice. I like that. Not exactly sure what it goes on, but hey, you can't equip it, but it's all good. You do have a store. Yeah, you can buy it. You get these crates on a very regular basis. I've felt no need to really buy them. I don't really like loot drops in principle. As I've mentioned many times before, I think that really, if you're gonna sell cosmetics in a game, which I'm fine with even if it is a premium game, I've mentioned that before, it's best just to offer people a direct, non-jump-through-hoops mode of getting the things that you want. Primary weapon sticker there. I could put shark metal on it. There we go. That's nice. Being able to apply stickers to weapons is pretty cool. Swap out skins and all that sort of thing. You can buy them with this currency. Of course, you get that from duplicates. Very similar to the way that Overwatch works, but I would really just prefer to buy them for money. Especially when they start releasing seasonal skins and people start chasing them, and yeah. It's an obnoxious system. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's consumer friendly. I just want to be able to buy the thing I want for the amount of money that I'm given. If you want to give me loot drops in between levels, that's welcome, that's fine. But don't make me jump through ridiculous hoops to get the thing that I want. Like, it's just silly. Alright. I've talked enough about that. I've talked enough about business model. I've talked enough about options and my big concerns with tutorials. So, the proof of the pudding, of course, is in the eating. So let's get to it. Alright, We've quickly jumped into game. Didn't take too long at all, honestly. It very rarely does, as much as there has been talk online of the health of the player base. I certainly have not had a problem getting games up to this point. So, welcome to LawBreakers, and welcome to 0G, which I'm propelling myself through, as you can see, and let's murder some fools. We're currently running a mode called Uplink. I get splattered in the face. The game has 5 modes, but one of the issues that it has is that there's some mode redundancy. There are 2 modes, Uplink and Overcharge, which are almost identical. Both require picking up the thing, and both require charging the thing. Now, there we go. Ah! Getting there before I die. Never mind, too late. In the case of Uplink, only one team can charge the thing. But if you grab the uplink and take it to your base, then you can also charge the thing and your bar will go up. In the case of overcharge, there's one charge bar that's applied to the battery itself, and the battery is stealable. So it's a very small difference, and I believe Overcharge was actually developed prior to Uplink, and I've heard some rumors that what there is of a competitive scene for this game so far, which obviously isn't particularly large, prefers Uplink over Overcharge, probably because the theft aspect of Overcharge, I imagine, is quite frustrating. The other modes include Turf War, which is a 3-point domination set where you capture the points, they lock for about 15 seconds, then they unlock again. And one of the most interesting in terms of, like, style, which is Blitzball, a mode not named after the Final Fantasy mode, in which you grab a ball, and that ball is voiced, I believe, by, I can't remember if it's Rick or Morty. I never can because I don't watch the show. It's voiced by one of the two from the cartoon. And the ball's sort of constantly yelling at you to save it and all sorts of things like that. Ow. You probably noticed the time to kill is pretty low in this game. Yup. Absolutely. You die really fast. You grab the ball and then you put it into the goal. Now, Blitzball in particular, and to a lesser extent, Overcharge and Uplink, are all indicative of the biggest problem I think this game currently has. And that problem is map design. I do not think the game has particularly good map design, and I think as a direct result, it is suffering quite a bit. Now, the upside of saying that the game has poor map design is that that's actually a very fixable problem. You just need to make better maps and then update your game with them. The game currently has 7 maps, and it runs all 5 modes across all of them, which is probably part of the problem, honestly. The maps are not going to be suitable for 5 different modes to the same extent. I think, you know, that's not even something that I need to tell you. That should be obvious to anyone who's ever played a first-person shooter. You generally want maps that are tailored to particular game modes. Ow. And in this case, you don't really have that. So there is a gamut running when it comes to map quality. Blitzball in particular is a huge problem because most of the maps are not large enough to support a mode in which you can move very quickly, pick up a ball, and move with momentum to instantly score into a goal. In pub games in particular, it is nigh on impossible, in my experience, to actually properly defend your goal in a Blitzball game. I've seen on certain maps a player go from grabbing the ball to putting it in the goal, which is an instant process, in about a second and a half, which is almost impossible to stop. At a pro level, maybe. In a pub level, absolutely not. And it brings me back to the comparison with Tribes, because that, again, was a very momentum-driven shooter, and a very, very good momentum-driven shooter at that, before they went to hell with it. I'll switch out my class and show you something a little bit different. Go over to Bombshell. Tankier class with big rocket launcher, less movement-based abilities. I do love the way Wraith chains his slide and his triple jump together. The momentum feels really good with that. We've got a more traditional rocket launcher here, but regardless of that, she's pretty tough and she's got some great weapons and abilities. Alright, as I said, I do believe that Tribes was a very good example of a game that did momentum well. And it had a flag capture mode, and you could move at incredible speeds in that game. But here's the thing about Tribes, is that there were ways and means to stop and properly defend against that. However, in this game, there really isn't. I remember time after time, someone going at full speed and slamming straight into an energy force field wall. And it's like, oh, well, so much for my momentum, right? Well, there really isn't a lot of that here, and the maps are not large enough to accommodate the speed at which you can often move in. Particularly when you have momentum-focused classes and perhaps a area which has a large amount of 0G, which you can propel through at a pretty high speed depending on what class you've gone for. That was not a great demonstration of gameplay, but you're starting to get the idea. A little bit hard to be good and also talk, but hey. So a lot of the problems could be fixed by changing map design. One of the defensive modes in particular I've noticed is almost impossible to crack on particular maps, especially in disorganized pub groups. Good lord, was that 3 to 9? That is disgraceful. Oh well, we'll try and do a little bit later in the next map. Overcharge, I've seen on certain maps, once you get into the room, there's barely any entrances, like 2 entrances, so if you get a few people in there, it's almost impossible to break without a concerted, organized attack, which in a pub match-made group is not going to happen. And you've got to accommodate for that, because that's where the majority of your game's going to actually get played. That can be designed around. You know, you could have a much larger area to defend, more entrances, more wide open spaces, less choke points. These are the sort of things that are needed. And the 0G is also something that suffers from an inconsistency in map design. There are some that do 0G really, really well. There's one called Vertigo, which is fantastic. It's a great map, especially for uplink. I enjoyed it a lot. There's a huge 0G area that you can propel yourself through, and it's actually very much like a Tribes map. You propel yourself all the way across the field. There's a ton of great 0G combat. You try and grab the uplink from the base and then head back across that 0G no man's land. That works really well. But there are other maps in which there are too many choke points, too many corridors, and the 0G area almost feels like an afterthought. There's really not a lot you can do in it. You can't propel yourself correctly. You can't really get an awful lot of momentum going. And that's where the game truly shines, when you're able to get that momentum going. So that is a problem I think they need to address big time. And the little issues that I mentioned earlier about team balance and AFK players and all sorts of things like that. There are also some people wanting class limits. That's debatable. It is definitely debatable. I can certainly see the value of that, but simultaneously, in a game like this, I think it's less of an issue than it would be in a game like Overwatch. So let's address the classes. Let's address the Overwatch comparisons, because there are definitely differences, and those differences are pretty damn important as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, Overwatch is a class-based hero shooter, and it's the most popular on the market right now. That and Paladins. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, you know, why LawBreakers other than that? Well, this is a far more skill-oriented game as far as I'm concerned when it comes to individual combat skill. There are definitely matchups in this game that may very well favor one class over another, but nowhere near as extreme as something like Overwatch, or even like Team Fortress 2. All classes are very combat capable. Even the so-called Battle Medic is an extremely combat capable class. And really, the fact that this game is team-based almost seems like a weird necessity rather than something that's actually integral to the gameplay experience. That spin is great. It feels more like a free-for-all individual skill shooter with class-based loadouts than a team-focused shooter like Overwatch. And honestly, that can play to its advantage. I am quite impressed by the depth of ability, kit, and variety that is on display with a lot of these hero classes here. Because there is quite a lot going on. A lot of them have 2 weapons, a lot of them also have alt fires, different melee capabilities, and different movement-focused capabilities that give them a huge amount of variety and a lot to learn. Now, learning a class in this game, I think, probably take an awful lot longer than it would do in Overwatch. And switching out classes may be less important because, as I said, they're all kind of combat capable and their roles are less rigidly defined. Currently just waiting for one more player, but it's a good chance to get a little bit of exercise, get a little bit of practice with Vanguard here, who is a jetpack, chain gun wielding, star falling, Iron Man, pulse hand cannon thing. class. You know, she's got a lot going for her, though. It would be nice if she had maybe a second weapon as opposed to just the chain gun.
5, 4, 3, 2.
If you're looking for something that is a bit more focused on individual skill, that's sort of where LawBreakers is in the market. So I've questioned that. So what's the role of LawBreakers? You know, what's the point of LawBreakers? Where is it in the marketplace? Well, it sits squarely in a space where people may have got a taste for hero class shooting action through Overwatch, but have said, well, what if the classes had more individual skill and maybe a little bit more depth and more to learn? That is a great way to describe LawBreakers. 1 foot in arena shooter and 1 foot squarely in hero shooter. And yes, having the two combined together do work. And compared to something like, say, Quake Champions, let's go with the Assassin, even though I'm terrible with her. She's fun to ride around. If you look at something like Quake Champions, that is 90% arena shooter and 10% hero class-based shooter. As much as people like to claim otherwise, it's simply not true. It is mostly an arena shooter for the most part. I don't think there's really any doubt in my mind there, having actually played the thing. There is a space between those which LawBreakers occupies, and occupies well. And the classes are, for the most part, well fleshed out. As I said, I think a couple of them could use secondary weapons that they don't have. And some of them do feel maybe a little less complete than others do. Whereas, you know, some obviously have some very solid, complete kit. But outside of that, it does generally feel pretty good, and I feel like there's a lot to learn in each of these. It would be nice if the details were better displayed, and if the game had better training modes for these things, as we mentioned earlier. Not quite what I was looking for there. This is occupation mode, as you can see right here, which is sort of what you expect. You contest the zone, capture the zone, then it gives you another zone, etc., etc. Nope, no missiles for you, mate. Get out of it. There's this mid-air combat going on and me failing horribly at it. Turns out shooting people in mid-air with rockets is pretty damn hard. When it comes to time to kill, I'm in two minds about it because I know I'm not very good at the game. So I always try and temper any time to kill complaints I've got with that in mind. It's like, well, if I were better, I probably wouldn't die as quickly. But even the heavy class, which is this one, dies pretty damn fast. You know, a lot of DPS going on and not a lot of protection for the most part. So you will die quickly and maybe die a little bit too fast in many cases, possibly before you've spotted the enemy, which is a little bit further away from a arena shooter than I would like. You know, it's starting to lean towards the Call of Duty style of if you spot the guy first, you're dead. Thankfully, most of the weapons do require quite a little bit more skill than the basic hit scan weapons of something like Call of Duty. There are quite a lot of projectile weapons and so forth going on with this, but simultaneously, I don't like dying quite as fast as I do, and it would be nice if I had just a bit more chance to do some combat. You do get quite a lot of that, especially in the airborne stuff, as you've probably noticed, depending on how good you are in it. Sometimes you just get murdered like that. If you're good at propelling yourself around 0G, you can certainly stay alive an awful lot, and that reminds me a little bit of Advanced Warfare in the way that you could avoid the very low time to kill by just jet boosting around an awful lot, and of course, proper use of your ultimate and occasional defensive abilities. There we go. Oh, Christ. Speaking of defensive abilities, I'll just pop my ultimate and probably get horribly killed in the process. At least we got a kill out of it, so there was that. We are losing horribly. I can't even get to the occupation zone, let alone actually do anything in it. Switch out. Let's just show you a different class here. But generally speaking, I think the combat is really, really solid. The class variety is really solid, and the game has ideas. It's got different ideas. I absolutely love blind fire. It's weird that there hasn't really been a game prior to this that has featured blind fire. To include it in a game that has this 0G environment is all the better. Combine that with movement-based abilities, and that's great. The game just doesn't teach you how to do it properly. That's the sort of thing you're going to have to try and learn for yourself. But, you know, note how much momentum I was able to get there. You know, by doing the run right in here and then propelling myself and using the blind fire to give myself a bit more momentum. It feels good. It really does. Once you master that, I think there's a lot going for it there. If you master it. If you have the patience to master it. If you have the ability to master it. And some people will not. A lot of people are going to bounce right off it. I think we've already seen pretty clear evidence of that when people played the beta and said, oh, I just don't get it. It sucks to kind of float around like this. So, a conclusion. I like LawBreakers. I want to get better at it, and I feel the desire to get better at it. I think that there are areas that definitely need improvement, and that needs to happen sooner rather than later. Map design is a key problem. If you're going to stick with these modes and not alter them in a significant fashion, then I think you do need to redesign the maps around them. Blitzball clearly doesn't work on quite a lot of these maps. This one is a particularly good example. If we're playing Blitzball here, by the way, would be running into a situation where you would very likely be seeing dunks in about a second and a half, and I have actually seen dunks in a second and a half on this map. That absolutely needs to be addressed. The game quite clearly does not work with that in mind. I think that at least one of the modes is quite clearly extraneous and not required. Either overcharge or uplink, not really sure which at this point. Probably listen to the competitive side of players on that one as to which one's the better option. Oh, blow it, blow it! Ah! Almost got it. God, it feels good to, like, do good, cool things with this guy. Like I said, the classes do feel so damn distinct, even though you can't necessarily tell the difference of silhouettes. Let's address that, because it has come up quite a bit. I think that identifying silhouettes is nowhere near as important in a game like this. You know, you're not identifying classes which necessarily have hugely important differences in terms of their combat ability to the fact that you would approach them in entirely different ways. I think when it comes to immediate silhouette identification, you're dealing with games in which those classes are so radically different that that would matter. I don't think that's the case here. So, yeah, it can be tricky to necessarily tell at a glance what each class is based on some not-so-distinct silhouettes and visual design, but I don't think that's actually a big problem. We've been playing 4 vs 5 the entire match, incidentally, so I think you can see another one of those clear issues with team balance that's become a problem here that needs to be addressed. Oh, God, though. Wow, it's got that rough. Okay. Slow him down. Try and kill him from here, even though we probably can't practically do that. Why won't you die? I've hit you so many times. There we go. Oh, at least we got somebody. At least we got somebody. A lot of problems are going to drag this thing down. I think at its core, it's really good. I think these problems are fixable. As to whether or not you can convince people, you know, to stay, does it have the longevity? I mean, I think it does if enough people grab onto the depth that this game very clearly has, if they're able to notch onto that. You don't need a huge community to sustain this game in a healthy way. Would it benefit from having a larger community? Well, absolutely. I think if you want people to stay in the game and not bounce off on it, you absolutely have to teach them. And they're not doing a great job of that. I don't think this game should have come out without proper tutorials. And I think it's suffering as a direct result of that. In this mode, and in the beta that had very similar problems as well. It is by no means a perfect game. It is a very flawed game. But I think, while it's rough around the edges, it's worthy of attention, it's worthy of time, and it's unique enough to justify a certain class of player getting involved in it. And that's the kind of person that wants 1 foot in a hero shooter and 1 foot in an arena shooter. I don't like the idea that the game is being dismissed out of hand. And frankly, just as a final comment, I feel that there are far too many people who are very clearly enjoying the notion of things failing. They're reveling in it. And I'll tell you this as a fact. As a critic, I never ever cheerlead the failure of a product. I want every product I play to be good. Because why on earth would you ever want that? And why would you want people to buy something that ended up sucking? Why would you want other people to be unhappy? What's the benefit to you there, and what's the point? This makes you a sociopath. LawBreakers, ladies and gentlemen, available for $30 on PC or your regional equivalent, also available on PlayStation 4, although, as I mentioned earlier, currently suffering at the time of recording from some hitching issues in that regard. I'll be playing a little bit more of this, and I do hope that their rapid development updates will actually result in big improvements, because, as we've seen before with games like Rainbow Six Siege, if a game has a good core, you can absolutely turn its success around. I'm hoping this won't turn out to be another Battleborn. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, by all means, do feel free to click the like button. If not, the dislike button is right over there. Either's good. both support the video, and you can check out our official subreddit for discussion on this game and this particular video. Also, bear in mind, I've been doing a very regular new series in which I highlight some really cool games on Steam that you probably haven't noticed, something that's flown under the radar. I've done 3 videos in that series so far, and rebranded the other 9 after-hour videos. So there's like 12 TotalBiscuit suggests game name videos that you might want to check out, because there's some really interesting stuff in there. I'll see you next time.